Well, welcome back to Between Two Sermons, everyone. So great to have you with us. And we've made it all the way to command number 9.
How amazing,
Almost to the finish line.
Almost done.
Holy
One more.
cow.
Yeah.
Holy cow. And this week, Rob, we're talking about do not lie or do not bear false witness.
Yes.
Depends on which translation you read.
Yeah.
But, I think last week I started off with this question, and I wonder the same question this week. If anything in your study kind of surprised you as you started kind of uncovering more about this command.
I think the first thing that I think of is, and I said at the beginning of the sermon, is that the command, as it's written, you shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. Every commentary I read said the original context was about the courtroom scene. You think of courtroom as a modern phenomenon,
right?
So, but as I thought about it, even though they probably didn't have cedar paneled rooms with gavels,
Right.
But I mean that Israel had set up a system, Exodus 18, and to deal with the various concerns that people had, and you think about, they get this set of laws that they never had. For 400 years they didn't have any laws. I mean, at least written down. They were just slaves, and the whole part of the point of the Ten Commandments is it's an outline for freedom, but freedom doesn't mean do whatever you want.
Right.
Freedom is organized decisions and living within limits and expressing. And so I guess that was the first thing I thought of, was even though I do think ultimately in the larger scheme of the whole Bible, it's talking about integrity in speech and lying, as you just said, but that the original context was about, even as I mentioned, malicious witness. Almost immediately he gets to that people would be going to court. They would have to be. And one interesting thing, I didn't mention this in the sermon, but not only was there this law of malicious witness, but let's say that I accused you of a crime. Yep. You did something, you robbed something, or you killed somebody, and I'm giving the witness. And let's say the crime is so serious, adultery, murder, whatever, that it's the death penalty.
Yeah.
In that case, as a witness, I'm required to be one of the first people to participate in your execution.
Oh, got it. Yeah.
So let's say in those days, let's say it was stoning. So I had to realize, you just thought how thoughtful, Moses and the Lord and that said, listen, they're never going to fully mitigate bad behavior and deception.
Yeah.
But they're saying, we want to make sure that people know they get up on that witness stand and they're going to lie. They're going to have to also participate in the execution of somebody, which is a pretty big deal.
That is a big deal.
Yeah.
I had not even thought about that.
Yeah,
that's amazing.
Says.
Well,
will be he said, you will be the first one to cast the stone or something like that.
Sheesh. So, that just reminds me, you're going down this road. That just reminds me, I just read this morning in my own personal kind of quiet time this morning about Jesus before the high priest, before the crucifixion. And they're kind of living out this command in real time. They can't collaborate witnesses. They can't get the witnesses to actually agree.
It literally uses the language. I had it in my notes, but I didn't use it because there was so much. But that it says they found false witnesses.
Yes.
That's how Matthew, I think, says it, which is right out of the 8th command.
Yeah.
9th command.
Yeah. And so they can't. So they're trying to actually apply the command correctly, even at Jesus's execution, and they can't find a way to do it, and so they
can't agree, or
they can't even agree.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's
that's
fascinating.
Very interesting.
Yeah. So they're taking it very literally in that way.
Yeah.
But I love how you're breaking it down, which I think across this whole series, that's what we're trying to do, is demystify these commands a little bit.
Right, and bring them to everyday life.
Yeah, bring them to everyday life.
Yeah.
And the way you phrased it in your first point, and I think it really is the point that could carry throughout your whole sermon, but your words matter, is what you said in that one.
Right.
And why don't you just unpack that for us a little bit?
Yeah, I think that's so critical, even as I think I want 2 different times, I quoted the words of Jesus, which we have been doing in this series, where Jesus, in his own way, says that, when he talks about that whole thing about oaths, Matthew chapter 5, the Sermon on the Mount. And I think that's it. Yeah, and he says, he talks about the religious people of his day who had this sort of, you might say, tiered value system about language. If I say it here, if I say it in this way, or I add God's name to it, or I swear by the temple, then it means something. And if I don't say that, by implication, Jesus is kind of saying, well, does that mean the rest of what you say isn't that important?
Right.
And Jesus is saying, in his own words, all of your speech should be oath laden. There should be only one level of speech. You ought to speak honestly, and your speech ought to have integrity. And so your words matter, and words are powerful. And we sometimes think sticks and stones will break my bones. Maybe nobody knows this anymore, but this old saying. But words can never hurt me. But of course, that's meant to be ironic from the beginning.
Right.
Words are very powerful. Words have tremendous power to wound. People remember things as we all, if you think about your own life, that were said to you positively or negatively from when you were a kid or you were, or a young person. And so words are very powerful. And of course, we talk about the Spirit as Christians and, using our words, using God's words as life-changing events. So I think that's something that in our day, when there's so much, noise and fluff, and we it's even become almost, you could probably go to the dictionary and look up fake news because that's probably in the dictionary. It's become so ubiquitous that we words have in some ways become in our culture almost less meaningful. But that's a deception. It's not reflective of reality. Words really do matter, and especially as believers, there's so much. Speaking the truth in love, telling people not only things that can build them up, as the New Testament says many things. I should say things that build you up, that call out your gifts, that affirm you, but also speaking the truth in love is encouraging and using our words. Not to be silent, to challenge people on things going on in their life. Those are powerful. When someone says to you, "I love you, but this is what I see in your life," those are words, and they can be very powerful.
Yeah, you're totally right. Those type of words, in the short term can seem kind of painful, but could be in the long term be things that actually bring about a lot of growth in our lives as well.
Absolutely.
But I did want to kind of touch on this point because I think as you're alluding to, in our culture right now, I don't know that we know how much our words really affect others.
Right.
Because a lot of it is done behind a screen.
Right. That's right.
And we don't see the impact that our words are. Like if I were to say to you right now some really hurtful comment, I would instantly see on your face, like, oh my goodness, I've really hurt Rob right now.
And if you care for me, you can make an adjustment in the moment.
Yes, and or go like, oh man, I'm sorry, I didn't even really mean that.
Yeah.
Behind a screen, there's so much anonymity, and sometimes with people we don't even know.
Of course.
And we're just throwing off comments.
Yeah. And
I just think that, man, maybe that really violates this command.
It challenges us. As I think I said, I was quoting some article I read, but paraphrasing it. But when it comes to all the, let's say, the unsavory, negative, critical language about whether it's politics or whatever it is, whatever the issue is, this writer said it's almost between the way Christians and non-Christians use social media, it's almost indistinguishable.
Yeah.
Where you'd say, well, if someone uses, whether it's colorful language or overspeaks or whatever, that we have become so comfortable, as a culture. And sometimes we're doing it just because, as you say, it's anonymous, or it's not anonymous. It's through digital media. I'm not seeing these people. I may never see them. They may be, even if they live in my town. But other cases, of course, in social media world, you're using pseudonyms. You don't even know who the person is.
Right.
So, but even if you do, as you're saying, it's a lot easier for me to criticize somebody who isn't around,
Yes.
or isn't have a chance to respond. And I think it's a very dangerous thing, and a foolish thing, and Christians are not exempt from it.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think that's just a super practical way to apply this command to our lives.
Yeah.
Like take a breath before we type something.
Yeah.
And go, do I need to do this? And is this building somebody up, or is
Yeah.
this tearing somebody down?
And or that's the great first question. And or would I say the same thing if I was sitting next to this person? Both of those are good.
that's a
good
great
challenges to say. If I was sitting with so and so, would I say this
Mm-hmm.
to their face? Would I? And am I saying something that's building them up?
Yeah, that's really good. Those are two really good ones. I did want to explore this because obviously you don't have the time to get into every detail in the
Right.
sermon. But one of the questions, as we were talking about this with a few other people, was, well, when is it okay to lie?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, is this a prohibition for lying all the time?
Yeah.
Or like, what does that mean? I think it's a really fascinating question.
No, it's a great question. I
yeah.
mean, I think I was one writer pointed this out just from the Bible standpoint, two examples where people seem to have not only, let's say lied, did not speak the right the accurate answer to the flat out question, and they were commended for it or not commended for it. Rahab, if people remember the story, when she was hiding the spies in the land of Canaan before it became the promised land, or the Jews walked in there, the Jewish people walked in there, and she was hiding the spies, almost like a Holocaust thing, Corrie ten Boom, if people remember that story, and hiding people. And she said, no, they were here and they left.
Right.
But yet they were in the attic. The story of the midwives that were supposed to kill the firstborn children because Pharaoh wanted to kill the Jewish boys. And they said, when Pharaoh called them on it, they said, well, the Hebrew women are just so, whatever the word is, vibrant or whatever it is. They're so they give birth so quickly. We can't. By the time we're ready to kill the boy, he's gone. And so those were just two examples. But I think I think it helps us. Challenges, I should say, not helps us. It challenges us to even this whole idea of all the commands. We sometimes want to minimize them to sort of simple behaviors and not really think them through.
Right.
And so in the case of those examples, which are rare or unique, and we could come up with other ones in our own lives, we're saying what's the greater good? So you might say, if I'm hiding Jews in the Holocaust in the World War II as an example, and I'm hiding them in the attic, and I'm telling the Gestapo that they're not here, I'm valuing their life.
Right.
I'm so that value of life. I'm even using my words in this case. I am telling a lie.
Yeah.
But I'm doing it to serve not myself. I'm not gaining something for it. I'm not saving myself from trouble necessarily. I'm saving a life. Then those rare cases, it would seem, even in those cases of the two Bible ones we mentioned, that those people were not, criticized for that.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And even as you apply this to the other commands too, you can kind of see this theme taking shape a little bit. Because let's take Sabbath, for example, and the criticism that the Pharisees gave Jesus, and his response to that question, to their questioning of him, is what's better to take a life or to save a life?
That's right.
Essentially, that's what, and he throws the question back at them. And he goes, well, obviously it's to save a life.
Yeah.
And he healed people on the Sabbath. And that got him in trouble.
Right.
But his greater priority was life.
No, that is really a great example, the Sabbath one, as you just pointed out, because, and so interesting, Jesus of course, he's the Son of God, and he does Jesus. It's interesting. Jesus did obey the law as a human being and as a child and as an adult. He had respect for the law. It seems like it in every case, but that's a perfect example where he's saying you've minimized, reduced, kind of missed the real meaning here, because the real meaning, as you're pointing out, of the Sabbath was to provide human rest, human well-being, that you are not a machine. In other words, the true meaning wasn't that if you don't eat, work or play, or eat ice cream or go to work, if you don't do these things, you're earning some kind of favor with God. Is not what the Sabbath ever meant.
Right.
So you after a course of time, sort of this incrementalism, or something becomes to mean almost the opposite of what it means.
Right.
So I think that is true, and it's a challenge to us as Christians, whether it's these commands or other teachings from the Scriptures, is have we really appreciated the true meaning of these teachings? Of even as we were saying in this whole series, a lot of these are stated negatively, but even looking as I thought the week before, you shall not steal, and it seems clear from the teachings of the New Testament that it's sort of this bare minimum that opens up of why would you steal in the first place? Because you don't feel your needs are met, or that you're not going to get things, in this idea of what God has given you as a person of faith, as a Christian in this case, and how that can completely transform you from a taker to a giver, and you become generous. Wow. Yeah. The idea then becomes opened up to be something that's much larger than simply you're okay if you don't take someone else's stuff.
Yes. Yeah. And that's, again, as we were processing this, you in your sermon talked about using kind of flattery, as a form of this.
Yes.
Which I don't think a lot of people really, I think that's interesting concept. And you had said, you were talking about this in your sermon, somebody that we were processing this with said they were making the connection between, it's kind of the same as lust. You're using somebody else for your own.
No, that's a great
good.
analogy.
And I'm like, oh my goodness, that is. All of these commands kind of, as you explore them together and unpack them together, they have the same kind of themes underneath the surface.
Yeah.
So
you could say those two sides of or illustrations of, let's say, breaking this command, which is false witness, which is another way of saying I'm telling a lie about somebody. I'm attributing things to you about you that are actually not true.
Right.
And mostly that would be negative. If I said, John was an amazing basketball player or whatever, that's not really a negative thing or whatever. So to say it's usually something negative, or to pump people up with excessive praise that we don't really mean, but in both cases, I'm doing it for my own benefit. Either I'm tearing you down because it benefits me in some way because I don't like you, or I'm going to get something instead of you getting it, or I'm punishing you, or I'm pumping you up. I'm flattering you for the purposes that you might like me, that you might give me something I want, that you might it'll make you overlook my sins, or whatever the case may be.
Yes.
Both of those things are really done for me.
Right.
That's a good way. And even in the example that Dan gave was great about lust. It's a great example.
Yeah. So, as we kind of land this plane a little bit for people and try to apply it to our lives this week, what do you think the best question to challenge people with is, as individually and collectively, to kind of sit there with as they try to apply this to their lives?
I think someone said, maybe it was Curtis in our run through, said our debrief. He said, he's probably quoting somebody, but he said, words have the power to kill and to bring life. And I think that's really true. And I think we underestimate that. Whether you're a student, you're a parent, you're whoever you are, we're very good at being a sort of a false modesty and saying, well, what I say doesn't really matter. And I would say, to answer your question, what you and I say to not only just to our family and our friends and our church friends or whatever, but to people actually carries tremendous weight. And I think maybe a challenge would be, how can I, back to your point of, building somebody up, how can I think it's that Ephesians verse, which was in the sermon, that said, don't use no unwholesome words should come out of your mouth. That's sort of the simple way of don't criticize, don't use your words negatively, but rather, and this is a paraphrase, rather you should say things that edify others and help build them up according to their needs. Oh my gosh, completely turns it on its head. So maybe a challenge would be, who in my life today, friend, family, small group member, neighbor, barista, who might I encourage? Who might I build up? Not through flattery, not through fluff, but by noticing something, maybe even if I know them well enough to know their needs, to say something that might meet their needs. My words can meet needs. And I think if we thought about that, there's probably nobody, one of us, who couldn't think of someone that we could do that with without interrupting where we're going. It's just a question of doing it.
Love that.
Yeah.
Love that. That's a great positive way to apply this command to our lives. So why don't you think about that? Talk about that if you're in the context of your small group. And I think this is one we can definitely apply to our lives over the course of this week. So thanks again, Rob. Appreciate it. Thank you all for joining us, and we'll see you back here next week at Between Two Sermons.